World Championship Wrestling, a company that I loved and a company at times I couldn't stand. I think frustration is the best way to describe it, really. At times WCW had the best roster in the entire world, yet chaos in the office would seep into TV shows and pay-per-views, and you just have to admit to yourself sometimes that this isn't going to work out. Like a partner you're really fond of, but deep down you know they're an asshole. Today we're going to take a look at the worst rated WCW matches of all time, and because I know I can be way too lenient when it comes to WCW, we're using cagematch.net today to get those rankings. I know certain fans have took it upon themselves to ruin modern cage match ratings recently in the name of tribalism, but thankfully the old WCW stuff has been left pretty much untouched. A lot of the matches in this video are also coming up soon in my Reliving the War series, so consider this a look into the bleak and dark future of World Championship Wrestling. Also, only matches over 5 minutes in length qualify, and I think that's fair. It means the matches you're about to see were given decent time on TV and pay-per-view because some genius thought they were good ideas. This also means the worst match I've watched in WCW, David Flair vs Eric Bischoff from the January 18th, 1999 episode of Nitro, so I'm just putting it out there now. This match was the worst match I ever seen on WCW programming, and I urge you to check it out ASAP. I couldn't stop laughing at it. At number 15, it's the Doomsday Cage match. Every time I think I'm done talking about this match, it rears its ugly head and it just comes back wanting me to watch it again. It's just unavoidable. You all know this one, its crappiness has become legendary. Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage step into the Doomsday Cage against Ric Flair and Arn Anderson, and Ming, and the Barbarian, and Lex Luger, and Kevin Sullivan, and Zeus, and the Ultimate Solution. Do you think that's enough opponents, lads? Do you need any more? Of course, Macho and Hogan also win the match because why would they lose, you know? But the way the match plays out is pretty atrocious. It's a stacked cage with one level containing two separate areas. The babyfaces have to make their way down the cage like a reverse Game of Death without any cool kung fu moves. And at the very bottom of the cage is a ring where Hogan and Savage would face Zeus, now known as Z Gangsta, and the Ultimate Solution, also known as Bane from the 1997 Batman and Robin movie. It was a mess, a complete mess. But I've always said the Doomsday Cage itself being set up beside the entranceway looked pretty cool. That's about all the praise I can give this match. A Yappa Pie strap match, so absurd that it's become a meme. By this point, the Hogan vs Flair feud should have been put to sleep in WCW, but the company had previously seen pay-per-view buy rates jump up when these two were booked against each other. You can kinda see why they tried again, because at this point WCW were quickly running out of ideas. This is a Yappa Pie strap match, and absolutely no one but Hulk Hogan knows who or what Yappa Pie is. What's more, judging by the match itself, neither Hulk nor Flair knew what the rules were. Do you touch all four corners like a traditional strap match? Do you pin your opponent to claim a victory? To fix this little problem, the Hulkster says, "You know what, brother, I'll do both," meaning he managed to somehow defeat Ric Flair twice in one match. Seriously, is it really one of the worst WCW matches of all time? I don't know. But it's a fine example of WCW not really caring about the fundamentals as their final days draw closer. How very dare you mention Sting and the Great Muta in a video like this? Well, I didn't pick it, guys, and also the match is pretty awful. Muta doesn't have to do a whole lot, to be fair. He just kinda, I don't know, hangs around. It seems like everyone involved is totally clocked out, and what we end up getting here is a 5-minute fight where nothing really happens. It's basically a 2-on-1 match until the heels, Vampiro and Muta, begin arguing, and Sting then takes advantage to win with a Scorpion Death Drop. You've also got to deal with Mark Madden and ICP calling the action from the commentary table, so if you already have your preconceptions about Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope, then this match isn't going to change your mind. Granted, it does sound good on paper, but a lot of things in WCW sounded good on paper. I think fans expected way more from this match, and it plays out like a Nitro main event that's ran into overtime. From the same event that brought us the Yappapi strap match, it's Sting versus Lex Luger. Luger was being billed as the total package around this time period. This is a lumberjack cast match. Lex was running around breaking people's arms, and all these injured wrestlers came out to serve as lumberjacks. It's dumb, but in a way, it makes sense. What doesn't make sense is Luger bringing out his own lumberjacks, and all these guys have casts on their arms too. Did Lex injure all these guys as well or something? What's going on? The lumberjacks end up brawling all the way back to Gorilla, but Vampiro hangs back, and Vampiro ends up interfering to help Sting win. Way too many distractions going on here, and it's almost like WCW didn't understand the rules of a lumberjack match. Sting was also completely checked out here, and Lex, well, it's year 2000 Lex Luger. Take from that what you will. Hogan vs. Warrior, Halloween Havoc 98. A classic, an all-timer for sure, but for all the wrong reasons. WCW were known for bringing back legends of the past, and for this Halloween Havoc match, the company decided to relive a classic WrestleMania match by pitting Hulk Hogan against the Ultimate Warrior one more time. The story wasn't terrible. Warrior had overcome Hulk in the past, and Warrior positioned himself as the one man who could stop the NWO, seeing as he had taken out Hogan before. But when you jump forward 8 years, you quickly realise that these two had absolutely no chemistry together at all. Warrior said he was injured after kicking through the War Games cage at Fall Brawl a month prior, but even if that was the case, I don't think being at 100% would have helped here at all. The crowd was dead as they watched these two roll around on the mat, and even though they went through a few spots from their Mania encounter, it just wasn't good. The industry had moved on, and it was almost sad seeing these two try to excite fans in 1998. The big botch of the match, the flash paper that Hogan almost set himself on fire with, that's what everyone remembers from this encounter, and that's all you need to know really. Vince Russo defeated Booker T for the World Heavyweight Championship on the September 25th, 1999 episode of Monday Nitro, and to say fans were irate would be an understatement. The match took place inside a steel cage. It should have been Booker kicking Russo's ass, but instead we have a ton of interference. Booker also looked dumb when Goldberg's music played and he decided to stay inside the cage. He had the opportunity to walk out and win the match, but he stayed put, and even the commentators called out how stupid this was. Goldberg tries to spear Booker, he ends up hitting Russo instead. Russo falls out of the cage and he gets both the World Heavyweight Championship and a concussion. Russo was one singing the praises of Booker T and talking about how he deserved the chance in WCW after all his hard work. Not long afterwards, Russo books Kevin Nash to take the belt off Booker before Vince himself beats Booker in this very cage match. He's not the first guy in charge to give himself a world championship, and yes, it was done for heat and nothing else, but it's that kind of hate that really damages the perception of a company. To this day, people still rip on Vince Russo for decisions like this, and it does make you wonder what on earth he was thinking. 2 weeks before Russo won the championship, he booked what I think is the worst War Games match that ever took place on WCW television. Calling it War Games would actually be a stretch, but it was billed as such. This time, the triple deck Ready to Rumble cage was used, and again, to give a little praise, the visual of such a monstrosity sitting inside an arena is pretty cool, but I don't know, the fact that this happened on Nitro is both pretty awesome while also being downright stupid. Booker T, Goldberg, Chronic and Sting took on Jeff Jarrett, Kevin Nash, Scott Steiner and Vince Russo. The WCW belt is at the very top of the triple decker, and whoever leaves the cage holding the belt becomes the new heavyweight champ. Nash and Russo had issues earlier in the evening, and it appeared that Nash wanted to destroy Russo, but no, swerve bro. Russo hands Nash the championship belt, and Big Sexy walks out of the cage holding the strap. Bret Hart also showed up to stop Goldberg leaving the cage, but even an appearance from the Excellence of Execution couldn't save this one. Nothing but a long, drawn out and boring brawl with a pretty standard swerve finish that again got the wrong type of heat. I appreciate the company bringing out the triple cage for an episode of Nitro, but what happened inside that triple cage was absolutely laughable. These boxing matches never work out in a wrestling ring, do they? This time we've got Buff Daddy versus Roddy Piper. Piper was the WCW vice president during this time period, and he, along with Ric Flair, were hell-bent on stopping young talent getting a break in World Championship Wrestling. Keep in mind too that this was way before the New Blood angle and a few months before Vince Russo even showed up. Piper had 2 really bad matches against Ric Flair at the pay-per-views that preceded this one, so I don't know if WCW were trying to mask Piper's abilities with this, or if they actually thought a work boxing match was a good idea in 1999. Mills Lane refereed the match. Judy Bagwell made a surprise appearance as Buff's corner woman. It ends with Mrs. Bagwell putting a bucket on Piper's head. Buff then punches said bucket. Piper falls victim to a blockbuster, and Mills Lane counts to 3 in a boxing match. The fans loved it, to be fair, but I think it's one of those things where the fans in attendance just get caught up in the moment. They probably went home and felt really embarrassed. Kinda like when you go crazy drinking and you wake up the next morning remembering how much of a dickhead you were. Major Guns vs Miss Hancock at WCW New Blood Rising was billed as a mud rip off the clothes match, and that pretty much describes what the competitors were supposed to do. Get into a pool of mud set up beside the entranceway and rip each other's clothes off. Major Guns won the match, and afterwards Miss Hancock began having stomach pains. It was revealed the next night that she was pregnant, and so WCW toyed around with a possible miscarriage here during this pay-per-view. You can clearly see why this gets ranked so low, and yes, this also isn't the first time Russo booked such an angle. As it would turn out, Miss Hancock wasn't actually pregnant. She revealed it was all a big lie before getting taken off television. But apparently there were 2 proposed endings to this storyline, with either Ric Flair or Vince Russo himself getting announced as the father of Miss Hancock's child. I think even the most avid Jerry Springer fans would still find this incredibly dumb. From the same pay-per-view that gave fans Major Guns vs Miss Hancock, we have a Goldberg vs Kevin Nash vs Scott Steiner semi-main event that features a worked angle where Goldberg walks off in the middle of the bout. The burnout from swerves and worked angles was at an all-time high here, and the WCW audience were desensitized to these kind of things taking place. Almost every time there was a worked angle, nothing would come of it, and it really felt like it wasn't about creating shocking moments anymore, but rather it was about getting folks on internet message boards talking and creating buzz among a subset of wrestling fans who really didn't make up the vast majority. Goldberg gets set up for a powerbomb, but he just steps away and he gets himself out of the ring. Russo tells Goldberg to get back in and do his job, while Goldberg says "fuck you" right in Russo's face. We then have to put up with the commentary guys telling us over and over again that this is all real and this wasn't supposed to happen. But again, WCW fans knew better, and in general they didn't care either. I know no one really cares about Goldberg nowadays too, but back then people sure did. It's baffling to me that he'd even agree to go through with this. I just covered Sting vs Rick Steiner at the Great American Bash 99 for Reliving the War, and yes, it was bad. The finish was atrocious, with WCW using a stuntman dressed up as Sting, while a few good doggos tried to take a bite out of the fake Sting's hand. But rather than describe what happened again, here's a clip from my recent Great American Bash 1999 review. The 2 competitors then head to the back, and guys, get ready for this because it's unintentionally hilarious. A finish so bad that it makes you wonder how it got approved. After walking back through the curtain, Tank Abbott attacks Sting, wrapping a towel around his neck to choke him out. Sting's got the towel in his hand as Scotty Steiner calls for a doggo to come and attack the Stinger, and as the dog jumps up, we can see that this is some stunt dude dressed up as Sting. The hair completely gives it away. We then cut the footage of the real Sting, who now has that towel magically wrapped tightly around his hand as the cute doggo tries to bite him. And then it's back to the shit Sting as another doggo joins in on the action. Scotty then brings another dog, and we see Doug Dillinger and the boys running to Sting's rescue. Or should we call him Dog Dillinger? This is how it all ends, folks. The cameras cut back to the arena where we hear a chorus of boos, and I'm lost for words. I'm really lost for words. Rick and Scott then drag the referee out, and Scott orders Mickey J to award the match to Rick. Scott says Rick pinned Sting. WCW were just too afraid to show it. They're protecting their golden boy, and it was too violent to show anyway. So Rick officially wins this match, and yeah, this pay-per-view might even be worse than Slamboree, and we've only got 2 matches left. Scott tells the fans to bow down to the Steiner brothers. He also says WCW sucks, and that's why both he and Rick are in the NWO. And Rick wraps it up by saying Baltimore's the shittiest town in America. Just for the record, nothing of interest happened before the finish. Incredibly basic stuff that lasted a few minutes before the 2 headed to the backstage area. Scaffold matches always intrigue me because they look so dangerous and one little slip up could spell disaster for those competing in the match. A good scaffold match can be absolutely nerve-wracking to watch, and I don't even want to think about what it's like for the folks up there trying their best to keep their balance. It can look incredibly scary. That being said, the folks over at Cage Match ranked the Great American Bash 1991 scaffold match as a dud, and I agree that it wasn't great. On the day of the event, the rules were changed and a capture the flag stipulation was added to the bout. This is because no one wanted to fall from the scaffold, and I'm going to be honest here, I'd probably ask for the same stipulation too. Understandably, this comes at the cost of match excitement, but if I were up there, I wouldn't care too much about what the fans thought about the match. I'd care about making sure I didn't fall off the platform. Having PN News up there must have been a rib, but fair play to him, he didn't show any fear at all. Bobby Eaton also had a lot of experience in scaffold matches going back to his Mid-South days, and he also wrestled a ton of them during the 1988 Great American Bash Tour, but you could tell Steve Austin and Terry Taylor were not very comfortable up there. I do think though that it's a bit harsh ranking this one so low. I don't blame the competitors at all because it's a match that can take folks completely out of their comfort zone to an almost extreme level, especially if you have a fear of heights. At the same time though, I will admit as a viewer, the match isn't enjoyable to watch. Don't worry, I'm not going to show it in this video, but this is a pretty infamous match where Sid Vicious snaps his leg, and it's probably the most sickening bump you'll ever see in a pro wrestling match. The handling of this bump doesn't get brought up enough though. Instead of stopping the match and getting Sid medical help ASAP, the match continues on and the company continues with a mystery man angle that the bout was kinda built around. The mystery man was Road Warrior Animal, and even if the leg break didn't happen, I can't imagine WCW fans caring too much about this return. Animal and Hawk's previous run in WWF seriously hurt the Road Warriors, especially in the eyes of fans who only started watching wrestling during the Attitude Era, but really, that all comes secondary to Sid's horrific injury. I don't think this match would have ranked so low if it wasn't for the leg snap. I think it's unfair to judge a match due to an injury, so this is a ranking that I don't agree with. It wasn't a great match or anything, but there was nothing really terrible about it until Sid tried to jump off the middle rope. By the way, Sid said he was talked into doing this. He tried to protest it because he didn't want to do the spot, but the higher-ups in WCW for some weird reason wanted to see Sid fly, and what we got was one of the most gruesome and real things that ever happened in a WCW ring. Rated as the second worst match in WCW history and the 11th worst match in all of pro wrestling history, it's Mike Sanders vs Ernest Miller, taking place at WCW Halloween Havoc 2000. Why is it ranked so low? Well, it's a kickboxing match that ends with a cat getting counted out when Miller leaves the ring to attack Shane Douglas. It goes for way too long, hitting near 10 minutes of pay-per-view time, and most of the offense comes from Ernest Miller. Wrestling fans don't seem to enjoy any other types of combat inside a wrestling ring. Boxing, kickboxing, sumo, fucking brawl for all. Anytime a company tries to put on another combat sport on a pro wrestling show, it always gets shot on, and this Halloween Havoc match is no exception. I'm surprised, however, that this one does rank so low. I'm not saying it's good or anything, it's absolutely horrible, but it's also utterly forgettable, and I've definitely seen way worse nonsense happen inside a WCW ring. But I think it kinda goes back to fans just not wanting to see other sports take place during pro wrestling pay-per-views. Generally speaking, fans liked Mike Sanders to a certain degree, and the cat was one of the better aspects of WCW television during this era, but the match they had right here sucked, and the finish was as disappointing as the action inside the ring. In the middle of WCW's New Blood angle, the company decided to hold a Battle Royal on the 3rd of May 2000 episode of Thunder. Eric Bischoff and Vince Russo brought the New Blood out to the ring, Ric Flair showed up with the Millionaires Club, and a Battle Royal was agreed upon where the last man standing would become #1 contender for the World Heavyweight belt. And you do wonder how a Battle Royal could get rated so low, seeing as it should just play out like every other Battle Royal we've seen over the years, but trust me, this one is really, really bad. Flair specifically said it's an over-the-top battle royal, which should really go without saying. However, multiple guys got eliminated by going under or over the bottom rope because no one wanted to take any bumps in this complete clusterfuck. There was also way too many people in the ring, and WCW decided to keep adding more and more people just for the sake of it, including the Harris Twins and Harlem Heat 2000. Huge names right here that really got the fans pumped up. In total, 41 competitors are in this battle royal, and on top of this, the match just goes on for way too long. It's 20 minutes in total, and you're watching a bunch of dudes walking around and throwing punches for around 15 of those precious TV minutes. It all ends when Bret Hart returns to hit Hulk Hogan with a steel chair. This leads to Kidman eliminating Hulk. Flair then eliminates Kidman and Shane Douglas. So after all that, we're going back to Ric Flair getting title opportunities, and no one cared. The fun and games didn't end here though. DDP and Jeff Jarrett fought on the entranceway scaffold, and Jarrett was supposed to fall through the floor that was gimmicked before the match took place. World Champion David Arquette didn't get the memo though, and when David stepped out to go face to face with Flair, he fell through the floor and thunder went off the air. A complete mess of a match that doesn't get brought up all that often, so again, I'm surprised to see it get ranked so low. What are your thoughts on these rankings, and what matches were you expecting to see here but didn't? Remember, the match has to be 5 minutes or longer, so that does make things a bit trickier, but really, we could all name 2-minute Nitro and Thunder matches that were way worse than the ones mentioned in this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I appreciate you checking this video out, and if you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing. Thanks again guys, and please take care.